today we're going to have a little discussion on setting some board priorities and kind of getting some goals for the next round of goals. So the set of goals that we're currently working on was initiated, are we December to December kind of thing? December to January to December, yeah, okay. And so, as you remember, last summer we had Mr. Crowder here. I think it was Crowder. Louder. Okay.
Steve.
Louder.
Different than Louder with Crowder.
Different guy. Okay. So Mr. Louder was here, and we talked about some things just that we thought were important and kind of set some priorities for the board. So we want to, tonight's session, I believe, is going to be reviewing some things, primarily brainstorming if there's anything that we want to throw out there, and then we'll be back in 2 weeks to finalize those priorities so that we can give Michelle and her team time to define what we really want to do before we kick this off in January. So, and I believe each of you received some information from Michelle about the different things that we have worked on. So we've got these, our current priorities, current board priorities. There was 3 with some bullets underneath them that we are currently working through. And then, is this top one? So is Mr. Louder's information is here as well. Some of the things that we talked about with him. And then Michelle has provided for us some of the things that the district is going to be working on over the next year. So this gives us some information to start with, and certainly we can add anything that we want to this. Again, tonight's session is primarily brainstorming and discussion. We're not necessarily going to set any priorities, but if you, as we go through this, if there's anything that you want to highlight, just make some notes of that, mental notes or otherwise, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about this. So I don't really have any particular way we want to go through this, although maybe we could just start off by going through current priorities. Okay, so that's the district annual objectives 2018-19. If you want to pull that particular paper up. So this year, Michelle and her team have been working on these positively impact student learning through a bilingual program study with a lens of increasing access to dual language programs and ensuring a high quality delivery model. And we've had some discussion and reports on this already. So that's one of the things that we're currently working on. And it's possible that something could come out of that we establish another similar goal that's a continuation of something that comes out of that. Develop a long-term facilities management plan with a focus on, and then there's a number of bullets under there, a structure that is imparent, inclusive of stakeholder and district staff consensus, enrollment projections, building capacity, geographic information, school standards, boundary, basically our long-range facilities plan. And then the final one is attract, develop, and retain high-quality staff. So we're doing some work on those this year. Is there any questions anybody has on those, or maybe some expansion of any of those that somebody wants to add to our list? Any thoughts on any of that?
So what?
We have the district annual objectives and then the board priorities. We've helped come up with both of these. How do we decide where we're going to bin a new idea, like attract, develop, and retain high quality staffs on each sheet? Are we brainstorming for both of them, or we're just throwing ideas out and it'll be binned under one of these later?
So I think this board priorities is these are things that we have identified. This is a bigger, broader list. Then under district annual objectives are things that we have taken from this list, and I think these were all things that came out last year with Mr. Crowder a year ago. From this list then, we identified 3 and kind of expanded them into our annual objectives for the current year. So you should see in this board priorities list this information. It may not be in the same format and the same exact language, but this came from these board priorities.
So let me ask a different way. Are we going to change our district annual objectives now or just the board priorities?
Okay, so here's what we're doing. These board priorities, this is, the way I look at this is kind of a parking lot, if you will, or incubator, I think is the term we're using now, where we collect all of the information, anything that we've identified. It may not become an annual objective, but these are things that as a board we've identified. So this would be, I think, a running list. It's not going to go away, but from this we will then select a number of what become annual goals. In this case, we're calling them annual objectives. Okay? Does that?
So yeah, my question is, are we modifying the annual objectives right now, or are we just working on the incubator parking lot?
Incubator parking lot.
Okay.
So again, today, our goal is to come up with a list of things that are board priorities. I'm not sure priorities is necessarily the right word, because priorities implies that, everything's a priority. Well, no, it's a list of things that we think are important. But
So we're working on this one.
So just going over the annual objectives, so we're going to add anything that comes out to the priorities, and then next week or next meeting, we're going to prioritize our priorities. So that's why I think it's a little confusing.
So we're going to focus on this one.
Well, we're adding to that, but just starting with these current annual objectives, does anything come out of there that might be, that you would see as, anything come out that maybe is not included in this list, related to this list, that we would add as a priority?
I just have a couple of comments on the annual objectives, and it seems like we're looking at both of them. So for people at home, the bilingual program, that's one of the main ones, and the long-term facilities management plan. I feel like we've made a lot of progress in the last year, and both of those should kind of reach some sort of, not necessarily end conclusion, but we should have some sort of more concrete plan. I think we've spent a lot of time invested in looking at those things, and I would expect that this upcoming year, we had a recent update on the bilingual program. We're kind of looking into more expansion, and I'd like to see that come to a concrete recommendation that, okay, well, this is the plan going forward. Same thing with the long-term facilities management plan. That was something we discussed extensively leading up to bond proposals over the last 2 years, and that's another thing that in this next year really should reach a conclusion, end product. This is our plan. So I see those two I'd like to see a conclusion to those two. The third one I think is an ongoing need and that one we could use some data or information. I like this, attract, developing, and retain high-quality staff, and how are we showing that we're doing that? The state changes have obviously tried to infuse more funding for public education, and that one I'd like to see us kind of show, okay, this is how we've incorporated that and how we're focusing, like the state is and OSPI, on increasing transparency, accountability, and I'd like us to put that forward, and show that we're, what changes or what things we're doing to demonstrate that we have attracted, developed, and maintained high quality staff.
Okay. So, now let's take a quick look at the list of things that the staff is working on. This is the colored one.
Are we done? I have a couple.
So we're not on board priorities yet, but if you want to add some board priorities to this, go ahead. What I want to do, Scott, is just look through these, and
kind of
So
brainstorming.
these are the ones that are, these are the ones that we know are on the list already. And then we can add some more to it, but is that clear? And then we'll add to these board priorities as we get there. So bilingual program, I think that's part of what we've currently talked about. Curriculum guides, we've talked about these for a couple of years now. 3, I guess, since we started our big curriculum effort. PLCs. So these are things that the district is currently on their radar. Student-centered coaching, instructional strategies, and then a program review of STEM. So under teaching and learning, those are the things that are on there. Not to say that we couldn't prioritize some of these as needed. And then learning support, we've got crisis intervention, family engagement, student and family supports, community collaboration, classroom-based supports, and then transitions. Under facilities and operations, we got boundary revisions coming up, and then the long-term facilities plan is on there. Safety and security, so we've got policies, training, buildings, and then prevention. And then under GFOA, I'm sure somebody knows what that means.
I do.
Financial.
Government Finance Officers Association.
Okay. So this has to do with budgeting, I'm guessing. So identify priorities across the system and then align the funding sources to those priorities, I would expect. Long-term planning and then prevention. So these are things that the district is working on at the district level. Pretty extensive list, and I think is there anything maybe that we want to elevate from this to as a priority? I think would be a fair way to state that. Doesn't necessarily have to, but we can see what's getting attention, but if we wanted to focus on it as a board, then we could certainly.
Well, and sometimes
Elevate
it's nice
those.
to know what the advantages are. Common formative assessments. I believe that was on one of my points when I ran 6 years ago for the school board. I think it's critical to helping us know where, I think it'd be a very useful tool to teachers so that they can take schools that have similar populations and compare them with other schools and see where they're excelling and see where they're struggling. And I think it's a great way to help teachers get their, learn what they need to do differently to get kids where they're supposed to be and help them get the help they need when you have, a certain, I don't know, there's just different populations all over, and they have different needs, and there's different understanding. And I just think common formative, from what I've seen in districts that really do well, common formative assessments are across the board. So that's one I think is just critical, and I think most teachers would, a lot of teachers are very anti-assessments, but common formative assessments aren't the kind that, okay, we're going to have hours and hours of testing. It's, okay, we're going to take this quick 2, 3, 4 answer quiz, and everybody in the district's taking it, and we're going to see exactly where they are in the point that they need to get at. So all of our kids are learning what they're supposed to be. They're getting to where they're supposed to be. So that one, I don't know if it would help, if it's going to change anything if we do move it to board priorities, but as I looked through this list, common formative assessments can help so much, especially along the lines of student achievement. And I think can help move that needle in the state of the school reviews, which is another huge priority of mine.
So this is listed under professional learning communities. Is that going to be the focus of PLCs this year?
Correct. And if you think about the board's work around the annual or the growth monitoring framework, that's really the board's work and where you set the guidance for having those benchmark targets and stretch targets. And then as that concept is kind of distilled down into the system, the classroom support for that work is really the common formative assessments. So in a lot of ways, as a board, you've already set the priority around having targets, or having our big outrageous outcomes, having those targets, and having a framework to monitor those. So we, for the first time now, have those stretch targets identified. We'll be able to present those to the board. Principals have already gotten those, and they'll now go back and work with their teacher teams around what does individual building level data look like, and where do they need to focus in to move that needle toward their stretch targets. So, that's a huge body of work we started last year, and I'm just giving that as the broad kind of board context for common formative assessments. So the board's guidance would be about that growth monitoring framework, and allow the rest of the system then to calibrate in a way that they felt like they needed to, or to meet those stretch targets, versus the board's guidance being, we want every teacher doing common formative assessments. So that's how that priority would probably work best for the district. I'm just trying to put a big umbrella over it.
And it's huge. I think it's a huge lift to get these common formative assessments. And that's great to have that big umbrella over it, as long as it happens. I'm a little concerned common formative assessments are just going to be used school by school and not throughout the district. And it would be really nice, since we have a common set of standards, that we have a common set of, we all want to get to the same place. We want to get our kids reading. We want to get our kids in math. So having those across the district, it's an easy way to see where any group of kids is at any given time. And is it, right now, are we looking at common formative assessments school site based or across the district?
So right now what we have is a consultant and a series of consultant visits from Dr. Luis Cruz, who is from Solution Tree, that developed the concept of from professional learning communities, where you analyze common formative assessments. So he's working with schools, again, to distill their data down and create action plans, school by school, teacher team by teacher team. So he's going into buildings, he's meeting with individual teacher teams and supporting each individual teacher team where they are on a continuum to get where you're talking about. So, it's acknowledging that each teacher team is learning together about what it means to be a professional learning community. They kind of analyze where they are on this continuum, knowing then that, okay, if we're a 2 and we want to get to a 3, here are the things we need to do different. And then, certainly it's, I can't remember how far the continuum goes, but it's pretty high up the continuum where the teacher teams are sitting, commonly developing assessments, delivering them, and then analyzing and talking about that data together. But certainly all of our schools, all of our teacher teams are on a trajectory with Dr. Cruz to get to, actualizing professional learning communities and common formative assessments like that model outlines.
Well, I know, and sometimes I wonder if it should come, I don't know. I mean, it needs to come from the bottom up. But, when you have 3 teachers, maybe 3 brand new teachers and 3 really experienced teachers creating their own common formative assessments in their own elementary schools, the 3 brand new teachers are going to be lacking the knowledge that the 3, it would just be great to have some really great teachers come together and say, this is what we need, this is, and anyway, I just worry about that going from the ground up rather than having it district-wide so that it's a clear picture,
So that it's common.
and it's common, and all of our kids are getting to the same point by a certain time. And it still gives latitude to teachers on how they get to that benchmark. But anyway, that's been something that's concerned me. I feel like we're a long way away, and I'm glad it's a priority here. I still wouldn't mind it being a board priority, just so we hear about it more.
So a comment specifically on that. So we adopted the STAR assessment a year ago, sometime last year. And so I had 3 elementary students this year. And so they each did that throughout the year. I think we required 3, and different teachers and schools had some variety, but everyone should have had it at least a couple times throughout the year. So I appreciate that information. And each one kind of utilized it a little bit differently, but it was nice to have that. The one thing I will say that as a parent that was challenging is what can be reported or shared can be selected, I guess. So a lot of them, it made no sense. Like, it was a number, like they scored this number, then this number, but there was nothing that said, well, this is, typical or the expected or the average of a third grade level, or this is, 89th percentile based on national average. Like, some of them were just numbers and lots of data that as a parent didn't, it made no sense. So like that was 2 of the 3 reports, and one of the child that had the information on it. So I think we need to make sure that that's a standard, that every report that's given to a parent needs to say in clear language, this is, okay, these are the numbers, and they would have a graph of their scores throughout the year, which is helpful. But some of them stayed the same, or are they staying the same because they're just really right on track, or are they just continually below, or, a little bit more details, and there should be like a standardized, like, every report needs to include where they're at. Because I just feel like we've shied away from that, not just us, but in education in general. We just don't want to say things like that for some reason, and I just think that's a really bad thing, because parents literally do not know where their kids, how they're doing. Because it seems like teachers, administrators, we're just afraid to say, sorry, your child's like 2 grade levels behind in their reading or in their math. And so literally 2 of my 3 kids, that it wasn't reported at all. We just got the vague, whatever we discussed with their teacher, tried to get a sense, but let's use the data and just be specific and give the numbers and give where they're at as a standard for everyone. And if it's disappointing, well, but we need that information, and we need to communicate it to parents.
It'd be nice to have that the same across, because some
Right.
schools, include a copy in with the progress report. Some schools don't, so that would be nice.
Yeah.
And those are summative assessments, and so they give parents a really good idea of how things are, overall at a certain point in the school year. And they are nice to have, and it's even nicer if you can actually understand the data.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, because these were all from the same school, and each one was different in
Yeah.
what it showed.
I think it ties in what you're saying to one of the ones I wrote on my list here was consistency in parent communications, but also in student conferences. Sometimes you go to a student conference and you get a fully student-led conference where the kid tells you what their goals are. Nowhere in there, and the teacher might not say anything, nowhere in there do you get any feedback, like you're saying, of where your kid is, what as a parent you can work on them with at home, what remediation they're getting, what enrichments they're getting if they're high cap in a standard classroom. It's not consistent on what you get in those few teacher interactions that most parents have each year. It's different school to school.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. I think, in the elementary level, really through 4th, 5th grade, I mean, the things that all grades are essential are where they are in reading, math, and their behavior. Like, those are the 3 things that really at every school, every grade, those early grades, that's what we need to know. And are they behaving? How are they doing in reading and math? Like the extra, and this is, I think, where the STEM, and I kind of circled that, where we missed that a little bit, because in our STEM schools, they do a lot of science projects and stuff that really doesn't demonstrate where they're at learning. And so I really think that we need to get back to focusing on those really basic, how are the students reading? How are their math skills? What's their behavior? As a parent, that's what I want to know, because I know that those are kind of the fundamental core elementary, primary educational objectives.
And I think the frustration with parents arises when they talk to a friend from another
Right.
school and they say, my kid's doing this, this, and this, they're at this level. And another parent goes, my teacher never talked to me about that. I don't know anything about that. Just consistency.
Consistency across. It should be a standard for that.
So, was that, all right, so if we were to sum that up, how would we do that? Have you got some thoughts on that?
Oh, I just have been taking notes in terms of, I heard using a standardized report that's clear and transparent for families around the STAR testing, and so that it's a standardized report that parents can understand.
Right.
And that there's some consistency or a framework by which we communicate with parents during student-led conferences, so there's consistency around the information that parents have access to.
And it can go beyond parent conferences if you guys believe that letters should be sent home to the entire district on certain aspects of student achievement.
Yeah, so if we look at the things that the district's already working on, I think they're working on some of these things, but so the family engagement, student family supports, and PLCs, I mean, those all kind of fit into what we've been discussing.
Okay, so let's take, anything else on either of those two sheets? Just continuing on with brainstorming here. So, going back to the board priorities. So these are some of the things that we identified last year. As I remember, and then these were binned into these different groups. So attract, develop, retain high-quality staff is there. I mean, it looks like we need to continue monitoring data.
I have one on there, Steve.
Okay.
I brought it up before, but as we continue to have a higher gap between a teacher's actual market value as wages go up sometimes quickly, ensuring that substitute pay is somewhat commensurate with a teacher. So the example I would use is a teacher with 20 years experience. If their market value is $100,000 and they're working 180 days a year, and that equates to whatever, $600 a day, when that teacher quits or chooses to stay home with a kid and they've got in their mind that their market value is $600 a day, and you want to try and get them to come in here and there to substitute, a lot of times it's hard to get that priority when you're paying them $100 and whatever we pay, $125 or something like that. So we're doing whatever we can to keep that in the forefront. How do we, I don't know, again, if it's part of bargaining, if it's something the district can do, but to set some kind of expectations that a substitute teacher is worth X percent of your actual market value, and try to set that across the board. I know we've talked about it in the past, but I think it could be a bullet under this board priorities.
Yeah, I agree with everything. That's a very big priority for me too. I think makes a lot of sense.
And I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I honestly don't feel like a substitute teacher needs to get paid what a regular teacher does. So say, they quit to take care of kids, or they retire and they're worth $600 a day or whatever it is. They're not making lesson plans. They're not doing a lot of things that a teacher has to do. And so, a percentage of that is fine, but at 125 or whatever it is, a starting teacher makes, I think, well over $200 a day, and it's going to go up. And so we could be at half, paying teachers half as much as a starting teacher, regardless of their experience. And I think that's ridiculous. So, and it is hard to get teachers, and it's hard to get people who want to substitute teach. I have had more than one person that has a degree that has gone elsewhere to get a job, even though they didn't like to do substitute teaching, because $100 a day is not very much, or $125 a day is not very much when you're working a whole day, or a good part of a day.
All right, so substitute pay. Any other ideas under attract, develop, retain high-quality staff? It looks like.
Is substitute pay part of the bargaining?
Yes.
That's what I thought.
And in some regards, sometimes they don't want it bargained.
I know bargaining.
Is there any way to separate that? Because it's just a bad set. I mean, are we really tied to that?
I would research that.
Yeah, I'd love to look into if there's a way
Yes.
around that, because it just seems, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
They're not represented, but it's the same
No.
people that
They're not
They're right
represented.
now, that in 5 years, they could be in that situation. So it just is a weird.
I'm trying to catch legal
That's fine, but-
counsel's eye, who's sitting
so
behind
maybe we
Brian.
can
I
look
can't
into
see
that.
her. I do believe our substitutes, especially if they're a casual or a non-casual sub, are represented. So it's a more complex question, and one I'm certainly
Sure,
willing
sure.
to look into and bring back.
A non-casual, so if
Oh,
they're
I
like a
can't remember the
long-term
term.
sub,
I think it's the long-term subs are represented, even
even though
regulars.
they don't pay union fees.
They're represented.
Okay. That's interesting.
Under here, we had the Grow Your Own at Crossville. I know we've been working on that. I think that's a good, if we've made a lot of headway with that, and I think we have. I think that's another good thing, encouraging our people that are good. We want to keep good people, so if they're a paraeducator and they want to become a teacher, let's support them in that, and I think that's what the idea of that was, and I know we've been doing that.
Long-term subs also get paid differently than a regular sub, and so it would be nice just to address the regular sub pay, because it is very different than a long-term sub pay. So, and if
Long-term sub pay is market value. You get your salary schedule, right?
Yeah, 'cause I mean,
I
then
don't
you're
know that for
you're
sure.
preparing lessons, you're doing all the things that a regular
'Cause you're
teacher would
doing
be doing,
everything. Yeah.
which is different than just stepping in for a day or 2 days.
I don't think it's regular market value.
I
It's
don't-
still less, but it's not as much less. And that might be different in Pasco than Richland, but.
So we can get more information on that. I think the gist of it is that we want to look at substitute pay in some manner.
Yep, I have it written down.
Okay, and then Aaron mentioned grow your own. So you can see these are lined out on this list, but I think these are probably many things in here we want to continue just to track and keep track of. Not that they would be priorities necessarily.
So that we've kind of made the
annual
change and that it's
objectives.
Well,
become a
the-
part
this-
of the normal.
Well, the strike-throughs just represent that we're either underway working on it, or,
Right.
I mean, it doesn't mean they're completed. It's just, these are things
Right.
that have already been moved off this list into district work.
Okay. Going down to facilities, increase community awareness of district facilities needs. Always ongoing work there. Maximize MGT facilities report and develop a deferred maintenance schedule. So we're working on the plan this year. Looks like we've done an audit or are going to do an audit. And then we've got our community group helping with these, community facilities policy would be the community use. All right. Anything else under facilities? Anybody wants to, any other ideas that?
I'd like to, and maybe the district's already looked at this, maybe they haven't, but get at least a report for our future thoughts. When I drive to work, I often drive by Thomas Jefferson in Richland, and they've built that new school, and they turned the old one. It looks like there's a big sign on there that it's a big, huge early learning center. And I think we should understand as a board, or at least do our due diligence. In the past, we've talked about replacing schools, whether it's McGee or something like that, replacing in kind. I'd like to know the impacts of what Richland's done. Does that inventory still go on to their, state match inventory? I doubt it, since they did it. Other impacts, like how they're paying for it. Did they just slap a sign on there, and did they do upgrades? Were the upgrades done by a bond? Just to understand that, so that as we build other schools, if we either have portables or other buildings or portions of buildings that we could utilize for, whether it's early learning or some other parent involvement, how do we convert that over without having other negative fiscal impacts? So that kind of research and report to the board. Lessons learned maybe from Richland.
Yeah, that's because they, as you mentioned, for people that don't know, they've replaced 3 or 4 elementary schools in the last 5 years.
Repurposed a lot.
Yeah, and so but the Jefferson one, they're repurposing, and so I'd be interested to know as well.
A portion of the
May-
school. Some of
right.
the school was torn down.
Right, there were 2 different, because part of the school was built longer, one was an addition, anyway. But that's a good point to look at if we're going to be planning for our facilities, because the thought to me of tearing down a facility that we have that's safe, to me is like out of the question. However, we have to recognize that having McGee or Livingston, where half the school's in a portable, that's not the best situation either. So, but is there a way where we can have a new school that fits them, but then also use their old facility? You'd have to look at playground space too. And stuff.
Everything.
Yeah.
And it ties back into the conversation we had a few weeks ago with Stevens. If we said, if we leave a gym, it'll go against our inventory. Well, are there ways that in the future you could leave a gym at a school and call it the city's or call it somebody else's and repurpose buildings? So when we talk about new in lieu, how can we utilize our other space? Is there any way we can do it without negative financial impacts?
Along with that, we'd mentioned earlier too, but this, we have the community builders group that's kind of working on the long-term facilities plan. So I would expect that would kind of reach ahead this year. And we could add this to the list, the boundary, that's a project that's being worked on that Dr. Reyes has reported on, I believe, about addressing boundaries. And we could include that's something that's being addressed over these next 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, I think is that not on our boundary study process? Yeah, on the current annual objectives. Okay, so facilities, student achievement. Anything, so we've talked about the common formative assessments. State of the school review, we're going to kick that off this year, I believe. Is that?
Next year.
Not this coming school year, but the following school year, okay.
We're working to align the system.
Okay.
I think we've done a really good job, and we have, as a board, have talked about it and focused on it. And I noticed at our graduations this year, we were congratulating students and staff for getting more college credit in the high school. A lot of our seniors are graduating with a lot of college credits. In order to have those opportunities, it's good to get high school credits earlier. It goes along with our 24 credits and beyond, whatever we're calling that program now. But we're rolling out new opportunities for math in the middle school, but for several years we've been talking about, or at least I've been talking about, getting foreign language credit in the middle school, and I don't believe that opportunity exists yet, so I'd like to see us focus on expanding that, and if we can't expand it, understanding the limitations of why we can't get 7th and 8th graders, other than those who have done bilingual. I think there's an opportunity, or dual language, there's an opportunity for them, but I think that opportunity should be available to all students to get high school foreign language credit in 7th and 8th grade. And if we move 6th grade to the middle school, if the district believes that 6th graders are ready for that, expand it to 3 years of foreign language available in the middle school.
Yeah, I agree. At least one. I know one is a standard in many places. Even when I was a kid in 8th grade, you could do it, but not in 7th grade. I don't know. I'd be curious to know what the standard, I don't know if 6th grade, if that's an expectation that we can have. If it is, great that they can do the high school caliber foreign language, but
when I was a kid, we had only 7th and 8th grade, the same model we have here in middle school. You could take it both years, but you only got 1 year of high school credit, so they slowed it down. They didn't try to jam a year of high school, at a 7th grader. So if you took 7th and 8th grade, you'd get 1 year of high school credit. And I know things have changed in credit requirements, but some kind of model like that, I think, would be a great opportunity for students.
Yeah. Yeah, and Mr. Miller mentioned the math credit. I know something was tried this year that didn't work, so that's going to have to be readdressed and addressed for this upcoming year, with the goal being that the right students. In the past, we had a report a couple years ago that showed that the right students were not, there were too many students placed in algebra in 7th and or 8th grade that were not prepared for whatever reason, and so when we looked at the numbers, many did not do well, and so honing that down. But there are still, I would imagine, hundreds of students that would be perfectly capable of doing it, and I think just kind of honing that into which students can appropriately take that, but still continuing to provide that opportunity without having them do something over the summer prior to 7th grade is something we need to look at for next year. That is changing. I think we already are as a district.
Is that on our list somewhere? Is this on your
It
district
would
attention
loosely be
list?
connected to the Pasco curriculum guides, and what Dr. Richardson is referring to is the district's efforts in ensuring that there's a data profile for kids that can attain algebra readiness in 7th grade. And I think that what we need to remember is what we're requiring those kids to do is to be 2 years ahead of their peers in mathematics. And, they're leaving middle school with 2 high school credits in math. So in doing that, we also have to ensure that they have access to the regular 7th grade mathematics standards. So that's what we're trying to do. I mean, it's a very aggressively accelerated program, and it was different when we used to have the opportunity to allow students to take the end of course exams at 7th grade to meet high school requirements. Now that the state has changed that requirement to a comprehensive mathematics test in 10th grade, we can no longer basically kind of waive or ignore 7th grade level requirements, which is in essence what was happening when we had the end of course exams in place, because they didn't have to meet standard on the 7th grade test. They had to meet standard on the end of course exam for algebra. So the changes have required us to look at it differently, and we did try a model this summer that absolutely was not ideal. We recognized that it was clunky for some students. It worked great for others. Others completed the content in 2 weeks and were done. So the district's efforts, will continue that. Like I said, it would align with the Pasco curriculum guides because it's a realignment of the math program. But basically what you're doing is accelerating those kids 2 years. I mean, so it's significant.
Yeah,
I
I've
mean,
heard
it's
that.
a heavy lift.
It would be nice to, and I don't know how long it'd take you to do this, and I know we're supposed to focus on the what and not the how, but as a parent, my kid had the opportunity, and we started late because of communication things. But I was thinking it would be nice to be able to tie that in so that they work on it during their 6th grade year instead of trying to jam it into a summer. So however, to expand that time and I think
And that really fits into the high cap that we've talked about, right? Like this is a change in not only just kind of state pushing to enforce this more, but that we've been working on to really meet the needs even in the younger grades, kindergarten, first, 2nd grade, that if a child is advanced, they need to be challenged appropriately and not just, oh, great, Jimmy's on level or a little bit ahead, like pat him on the back. Like we need to be, that's part of the appropriate education for each student, and so that's a big change as well that kind of fits into this as the math issue.
Yeah, and then not having access to 6th grade at the middle school makes it complicated, but certainly that's part of the effort, Scott, in realigning the math curriculum guides. It's not just realigning them at the middle school.
Yeah.
It would also be nice, I mean, speaking from a reverse perspective, it would be nice to have some kind of a curriculum like that or an online or whatever, because my nephew is taking advantage of that, and he's doing this mathematics curriculum during the school year so that he can enter 7th grade and do pre-algebra, is that correct? Anyway, but I look at my child who struggles in math, and I would love to have some kind of curriculum like that to do with her, once a day. So I think that could be used at both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, and this is kind of a change. The law from years ago says what, free and appropriate education. I can't remember the exact wording, but we've always looked at that more for special education. Like, okay, we need to, but really it applies to all students. And I think, and not just this is just a common thing, big picture, that in general people have always been afraid that the special students that qualify for special ed are not meeting, that we're not doing all we can to meet their needs. But really, this is every student has the same opportunity or value to get their appropriate education, and so it applies across the spectrum. And I think that's what's been kind of a change of mindset in many people in education, is that, hey, we really need to help every child reach their potential and meet their needs where they're at with differentiated instruction or all these different techniques that we have. And I think we're working on some of that.
So I think along those lines, so we've talked about equity and defining what equity is in our district, and I think that would be a good one to just go through and define what is equity. Is it making sure everybody just meets standard, or is it making sure everybody gets the supports they need to grow and develop where they are? And so
the latter. I would say it's the latter,
Yeah.
that it should be helping each student reach their potential and helping them where they need to be helped.
Is that on here somewhere as a priority?
Equity's under other.
It's on the bottom.
But I think I wrote this down as a bullet here, and it ties into what everyone else has just said. I think it should be its own bullet. And what I wrote was, we've had, and I didn't look at our mission statement lately, but I know in the past we've always had, part of our mission statement says we will teach to the unique needs of each student. That includes high cap, high need. And I think we've done for years a great job of providing services to high need, and we get more funding for that, and we have in the past, and we're starting to get more funding and more requirements to teach to the high cap. So I think it's just changing a culture so that the staff understands those expectations, and excited to see the improvements there too.
Yeah, I think as a teacher, and maybe Ms. Phillips can attest to this, it's challenging because historically we've been grading and evaluating teachers on the progress of students and getting, the students to improve. And so we've somewhat incentivized or encouraged or taught that we need to help those, help the students that are kind of struggling. And that's been a focus more so than making sure that the student that's advanced is getting, because they're not really graded or assessed, or in whatever way we've tried to assess teacher, nothing has been really successful, but they've tried to implement over the years, how do we evaluate teachers, how do we grade them? And at most, I would say, I imagine would feel that, they're graded on helping the students progress and not, the 3 or 4 that are advanced or whatever you want to call it, making sure that they're being appropriately challenged. I don't think that's something that's monitored or gauged, at least hasn't historically. And correct me if I'm wrong, but.
And it manifests itself in behavior sometimes. That's where the real challenge comes.
Yes, that's true.
And that's tough. I mean, teaching 5th grade was probably a gift because I've only ever taught high school, and it is night and day different when you're teaching one subject to multiple different kids than a group of students that are there all year. And learning that, I wanted to challenge my kids that were incredibly doing well. But when 90% or 85% of your kids aren't even reading on grade level, it is so hard to spend the extra hours that you can on kids that are already doing incredibly well. And yet you want to, but it's tough. So it would be so nice to, we have everything on computers. It would be so nice to have something that you can, really challenge those kids with puzzles, games, whatever, not something that's, maybe learning great, but it would just be nice to develop. I mean, that might be a long way out, but that they could use at home, that they can facilitate, especially if we're sending computers home. And I know we're only doing that 6th grade up, but it's got to be able to help there as well. But it would help. It would also help teachers if we could provide some kind of extra support that kids could even do on their own in the classroom while a teacher's working with the kids that are struggling the very most in the classroom. The independent learners can have something. It's just tough to do.
But I also challenge us, if we're going to provide the same resources and the same money, it's not just giving them something to do on their own. And I come back to this story I've told you guys before. When I went into kindergarten, 10 kids from my preschool went in and all knew how to read. And every day we were all in the same preschool, so we made up probably half the class, or maybe back then a third of the class. They would send us, because we knew the standards that they were teaching at the time when they're teaching everybody their alphabet, send us to the library, and I assume a certificated staff or at least a highly trained para at the time would teach us and go through reading with us. So it's providing the same resources, whether that's staff, if that's what's deemed necessary, and not just saying they can learn on their own here if I give them a little, like a computer, or give them some more worksheets. That's part of it, but we also need to provide more actual resources to it.
Yeah, I think that's a whole new look at education, which
huge,
would
and it's tough.
be great, but yeah.
And recognizing that it's not just a student by student. Some students excel in reading and some excel in math, and not all in
Right.
both. And so, I mean,
Right.
it's not necessarily
Across the
like,
board.
Miss Lincoln is assigned as the advanced student. She may do very well in reading, but may struggle in math. So it's not like we're trying to bin students.
Exactly. So we're talking about a big adjustment to education, but I think if we just look at equity and making sure that resources are focused, so that define whatever equity is in our district, I think that's going to be a big deal over the next year. All right, so.
Can I do one more at student achievement?
Sure.
This is another totally out there one. You can just slap me later if you'd like to.
Or not.
But I've thought a lot about this. It's been on my mind for a long time. Once again, a teacher's perspective, after not, and especially because I've only had it from a secondary level and getting it from an elementary level. All these teachers complaining about testing. I looked into the testing, how many hours they were testing, looked online. This test is supposed to take 2 hours. This test is supposed to take 40 minutes. So I taught 5th grade. I was teaching 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I had to take 6 tests. And they were all supposed to be a day or under. 6 tests in the month of May. In these 6 tests, some were 40 minutes, some were 2. The most was 2 hours that it was supposed to take. So this was the reality of it. You get in there and you start testing. The 2-hour test never takes 2 hours. Your highly capable kids might get done in 2 hours if it says 2 hours, or 40 minutes if it's done in 40 minutes. I don't think I ever had, if I ever had a student that came in under that time limit, it was not a lot. And I was teaching at a very low-income school, and so I'm sure it would look different in a different area. But then that test usually took all day. You still had 6 kids out of 27 still testing. So the next day, you're still testing, and all of the other kids are doing worksheets. They're doing anything you can come up with. And then you have the 3 kids that missed yesterday, and they're testing. So what ended up happening was the whole entire month of May, save 3 or 4 days, was testing. And I've thought a lot about this, and I'm like, this really is. I had a whole unit planned. We had a whole we had a whole unit that still needed to be gone over that these kids needed. And I had it all planned, and we were ready to teach it, and I couldn't. And that was extremely frustrating to me, because I felt, as a parent, these kids weren't getting anything out of testing except for maybe experience testing. The month of May was a waste of time. I actually taught in June because I'm like, you got to get some of this. And they're like, we never do this much in June. I don't care. You're doing it. But the problem is, I just feel like we can do something to fix this. I mean, one thing that would have been really easy is if we had like a test facilitator, hired a couple of subs. They have to be trained. You cannot have anybody even in the room if they're not trained in taking that test. But if we could get a couple of subs per building so that these kids that are extra could go into classes so that teachers can continue to teach, we could buy back, I don't know, 15 days of teaching or 12 days of teaching in May. That's huge. So that might be a long-term whatever, but I think it's something we really need to address, because student achievement is our goal. We do have a unique group of kids that are English language learners coming from low-income families, and we are far below the state average in those, or far above in those areas. So giving our kids as much learning time as they possibly can get could really move the needle in some of these areas. You know, I see this summer whatever slide, and I'm like, yeah, it probably starts May 1st, because that's when testing starts. And so I just feel like we could do something different to really, I realize those kids that take, 6 hours to take a test, they're going to be missing out on learning time. But why make 23 kids miss out on learning time for 4 kids' benefit? And trying to keep these kids interested in sitting still for 4 hours when, it's just tough. I think there's things we could do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the simple solution is that the test should be time restricted. I mean, to me, because in the real world, if it takes you a day to do something, that's going to be an issue, or we need to know that. And so just making all those tests time restricted, no, if it's 45 minutes, that's how long the test is. And if you miss it.
State testing?
Yes, these are set, the SBAC.
Yeah, so we need to lobby the state. Yeah, we need to legislatively encourage that, because that's ridiculous. You're talking about a month of school. If parents knew that, they'd be furious. I
They
mean,
would
we
be.
are as parents.
I was
because-
furious.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute, where's
There should be
my-
not just less
Yeah.
testing, but it needs to be time restricted. And if you miss that day, then you come in before or after school, or you don't take it. I mean, it's not the end of the world if they miss it. So again, because that's awful. You have lessons, the kids need to learn, and they're stuck waiting for their.
And I think time restricted is good to an extent. When you restrict a test to the time that it takes a highly capable child to get through a test, you can run into the problem of you're testing the abilities of a highly capable child, but you're not testing the abilities of our kids that aren't highly capable because they don't have the time. But does a child need 12 hours to complete a test? No. Are they going to do? No. I mean, it needs to be time restricted, maybe to what it would take the 3/4 of the kids to take a test. Anyway, but yes, I agree. A time
So that-
restriction would be a good idea. I think it would be good for the kids because sometimes they sit there and they're like, I don't really want to do this and I know I can do it later. And so they do. So
Yeah.
It was a little off topic, but that's how it is in the real world, right? I mean, all the tests I took in graduates, it's time, you have 2 hours, and if you don't finish it, that you don't finish it, and that's, you just
Not all
you
of
do
them,
what
but
you
yes.
do.
Yeah.
And so the majority in the real world is a time-restricted test because that's part of what they're assessing.
I took a 7-hour calculus test once in the testing. Anyway, so some are, some aren't, but yes.
So you captured that. We're going to
Yes.
put something around testing down there. I think that's a great point.
I-
All right.
I have another student achievement, if that's right.
Sure.
So, and I think it's a problem all across the state, but with the way we teach standards now, and I even see it in the elementary school with my kids, right? You get to do assignments over and over again. You get to often do tests over and over again to improve your grade. The students might know this, and now all of a sudden we have 6, 8, 10, 4.0s and valedictorians, not just at our schools, everywhere, right? And that's a great thing, getting to do things over and over again, but preparing kids for the real world or for college, when I hear that the UW, is accepted 800 kids to their engineering school and 620 have 4.0s, and then they go in and they're getting like 2.7s or 2.8s. We're not preparing them for the next step, in that when you have a chance to do things over and over again, sometimes the quality lacks on your first attempt. You go, well, I'll be able to do that again. I'll be able to do that a third time and a fourth time. So how do we, is there a way to change it so that we emphasize that quality is important the first time around? It's not just turn something in, and the principals here could probably speak more to it later, but, or offline, but how do you change? I don't know the answer. It's just, I know that I believe that the quality of work the first time around and the effort put forth is probably less now, and we have more kids with high expectations that going forward everything they can do is perfect, going forward to college, and it's a shocker for them.
Okay.
I would summarize that as, and this, I feel this way, to increasing expectations. I just feel like we don't have
Talk
high
about quality
expectations for students, I just think the expectations are too low. And they're perfectly capable of reaching or exceeding the expectations that we
Whatever
set
expectation is
as
set.
teachers, administrators, parents.
Okay, so student achievement, we've got testing listed under there. And, all right, so going down to other, we've talked about live streaming of board meetings, small innovative high schools, home link partnership, Hallmark experiences. I think those, just some consistency there. And then equities listed down there. So any discussion on any of those? So again, we're going to come back and prioritize some of these, but if anybody wants to speak to any of those things, then.
So I would just like to ask our students what they think about being able to take tests and whatever to try and raise their grades over and over.
Sorry. When you were mentioning about the retakes and retaking over and over, I know some teachers have in place this thing where if you want to retake it, you can retake it, but you don't get full credit for it. You'll get like 80% or you'll get like a certain standard, so it won't be completely full credit. So it encourages students to do their best their first time around, but it also lets, like, sometimes you don't have a good testing day or you just have an off day. And so sometimes you need that like retake, especially just if you didn't understand the standards the first time, but now you get it better. So I do think that retakes are important, but I also think that if we do have a little bit of a penalty where it's not worth completely full credit the second time around, we'll also encourage students to do better the first time.
But so you're saying that other teachers light or retake, and there's not consistency from class to class, or?
Yeah, there is. It's mostly, at least in our high school, what I've seen is that it's the teacher's policy. So it's what they think that kind of goes. So there's no really like set standard for retakes or anything.
Any other comments? Isabella or Alpha?
I had a teacher that wouldn't let us retake at all. So if you didn't do very well the first time, he's like, that's your fault. You should already know this. You should have studied. And if you didn't, this is what you get. So you had to study hard the day before.
And students love that teacher, I bet.
I mean, there's got to be balance, right? Like if you're sick that day and kids, they just push
Yeah.
through it. I mean, so I can see how it's beneficial at times, but it's probably going to be, there's going to be
Or
variation.
Like Cassidy said, just
Yeah.
you could retake it again, but you could only get a 70%, or you could
Yeah.
only get a 75, or, yeah.
So as a
Students
board-
would probably appreciate some kind of consistency, so there's fairness across the board in evaluations too, so.
One thing about it, though, there's not fairness across the board in college either, and there's not consistency either. So I don't know, I'm not totally opposed to having teachers that have this test be worth 50% of the grade, and this teacher having the test worth 30% of the grade. That's kind of life, too. So, and that, you're going to see those kind of variations in college as well.
Yeah, that's a whole big area too, because you could get into, well, extra credit. What can I do for extra credit because my grade is a little low? And so certainly we need some consistency there.
What about you ladies? What do you think would be an important board priority? What, have you seen things that you feel like would be important for us to focus on?
I like your idea about the testing, because I know, like, with my experience, like, throughout elementary school, I would finish the test within, like, an hour, 30 minutes, and we would start the test, like, let's say at 8, I'm done before 10 o'clock, but everybody else is still testing until about 2 or 2:30. And so you just sit there for, like, 2 weeks straight doing nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah, that can't
Amen.
be good.
Exactly what I felt.
All right, so we've got some ideas here. We want to try and wrap this up here. So anything on live streaming of board meetings?
Yeah, so back to your last question. So I'll just comment briefly on the first three. So I think the live stream we're going to discuss at our next meeting maybe. And the other two I'm definitely in favor of. I think we're going to discuss that. And those really tie into the equity. What we're just discussing is meeting the needs of the students. And we have many students who would benefit from another small innovative high school like Delta, New Horizons, some sort of hybrid where kids can go there in 9th grade at smaller high school, and then same thing with like a homeschool parent type partnership, that we're not meeting the needs of many students, that's what they need.
Well, if we can get a bunch of homeschool students, we won't need as many buildings, so.
Exactly. Oh, that's absolutely part of the discussion. That would help our overcrowding at numerous schools.
Yeah, and, yeah, there's lots of advantages to that, and, probably in lots of different ways. I'm not sure that our system is set up for that yet, but we're probably going to get there eventually. All right, anything else?
I'll spend 30 seconds on the Hallmark experience. I think I read a note to Steve and Amy and Michelle on this, but what that one was is we have schools that get lots of grants. We have schools that get hardly no grants. They're in the middle, and we get schools that have ATP or PTAs that raise lots of money. And it seems like the schools in the middle sometimes don't get as many experiences because they don't have the funding and there's no expectations on what those experiences is. So you might have a school with high parent involvement, high monetary resources in the family, and they set up field trips, experiences that are funded by the parents, by the PTA. Then you might have a school in the middle where you have 50% free and reduced, and you don't have as many resources, but you don't have enough to get as many grants, and so you don't get an experience like the 21st, whatever that grant was that allowed kids to have 21st century grant that allows kids to have after school basketball, other stuff that's not included in after school all stars. So the school in the middle doesn't get anything, and then you have the schools that get lots of grants. And they may get experiences like going to Seattle to go to science museums or aquariums. And so just figuring out what these Hallmark experiences is by grade, and if it's not funded by parents or by grants, figuring out as a board if that's a priority, if that's something that's important, how do we create the money to do that? So again, it ties into the equity as well. Okay, so we've talked about several things here. And I think we'll
collect all of these into a single list, and next time we meet, we'll try and set some priorities. So,
I have one last one. Sorry, Steve.
Sure.
I don't know if it goes under facilities or others, but figuring out what schools need as far as materials. I know we've talked about it a lot in the past, and now it's no longer expected that kids bring in crayons or glue, and we use the purchasing power of the district to supply those, and it's optional. But other stuff that's required for classrooms, whether it's microscopes for the new science curriculum we have or something like that, it should be defined what each school has. For example, if you need a microscope to do a science lab, at my kids' school, they didn't have a set, and they have to go borrow it from Pasco High for a week. At other schools, they have a full class set. Same as technology. My kids are raising money for computers sometimes. If that's not something that PTAs should be doing, or kids should be going around the block to collect money for, set those expectations clearly for the schools that here's what you need in order to teach, not sometimes sometimes PTA can buy it, sometimes you can borrow it from other schools. Some schools have it, some don't. So just materials required, and define where the funding is expected to come from. And I think the model for that is just the one-to-one, or the computer and technology work that's been done in the past 2-3 years, and consistently defining that and implementing it across the district. But we need to do that for other materials as well.
okay. So we've got a list. If we can get this prepared ahead of time so we can get it out, people have a chance to think about this and review that list, and then in our study session, is it next study session where we'll be talking about this and trying to identify some things that we want to focus on as priorities, so that Michelle and her team can start putting some plans together before January. Okay, so that concludes our study session today. We'll be back here at 6:30 for our board meeting.